We are the Ministry of the Real Truth, and this is the third part to our review on who are the true Hebrews, true Israelites, true Jews, or the Hebrew Israelites. Is it A, those in Israel today, with their many factions, sects like the Hasidics, the Ashkenazi, those who speak the Yiddish, etc., and with their different religious rites, disciplines, etc., that they perform, like those at the Wailing Wall, or the US Hebrew Israelites. One has to be the true, the other has to be the fake. Okay? So we found this audio freely available in the public domain, public access, from this rabbi here. Okay? Avraham Shlemeh Adler. He looks familiar. We may have come across one of his videos on YouTube and then commented him, asking him, does he know the Ktav Ashery or Asheret? And he says yes, he's very familiar with it, and that was it. Didn't give us any more information. And also the Ktav Ivri, it didn't give us any more information. Okay, so it has a license, so we can freely use it. We shouldn't get any copyright strikes or any claims like that. Okay, and we bring it to all for educational purposes alone. And underneath this video, it has this writing here, this statement here. In this talk, A.S. Adler presents his findings about the Paleo-Hebrew, that's the Palestinian Hebrew, right? Script, Ktav Ivri. He explores where, why, when, and how, or where, when, why, and how the oldest alphabet was invented, arguing that it served as a pedagogical bulwark to stand against the growing influence of idolatrous paganism. His presentation focuses on the appearance of specific letters in that alphabet and the meaning of the pictorial representations, with pictographs. Okay. They were like these really simplified drawings of an ox or a bull, wiggly lines for the sea, all this sort of stuff, right? Before they had a language, a written language, a script, and then carved it in stone and all that sort of stuff. And over the millenniums, it became this language, okay, which they speak today. Apparently, they write and speak today. The ancient Ktav Ivri, Israeli Hebrew, etc. His presentation focuses on the appearance of specific letters in that alphabet and the meaning of the pictorial representations used for each letter in doing so. Mr. Adler takes us back to the times of Abraham, the tides of Ur of Chaldea, and the moon god priests of Harran. The presenter bases his talk on his detailed original research, which generated lots of great questions and some very good answers. Did we already mention that he looks familiar? So we asked him, did he know the Ktav Ashery and the Ktav Ivri? And he said, yeah, but he didn't give us any more information. Apart from that, he left us hanging. So this lecture was hosted on Zoom by Rabbi Reuven Chaim Klein. We're not too sure if it's Rabbi Reuven that had the video, The Warning to the Jews, where he stated, according to the book of Revelations, about these particular Jews that went into Germany, 1920s, 1930s, and they were the cause of economic crash and all this sort of stuff. And we did a video comparing that, what he said, this Rabbi Reuven, with what has been translated from the original Galilean Aramaic New Testament manuscripts, hidden, therefore preserved by the original, ancient, very old Apostolic Church of the East, today restored, because it was destroyed in around about the 13th century, the Middle Ages. They hid it for 2,000 years, therefore preserved it. And Victor N. Alexander, a translator from Mesopotamia, Syria, got hold of it, or he actually bought a Bible format of those original manuscripts and then used a method to translate them, because it's a long dead language. Nobody writes it hardly anybody speaks it today, into the nearest English equivalent, and that's what we're bringing to all from his former website, va.com, which is down, and we revived it, and he's very happy that we're doing it, presenting it to all people out there. He's very pleased. He's like watching us. Okay, he's our mentor, so he does now and again give us comments and says, wow, I'm learning a lot from you working on his website, right? Trying to get it to all people out there. And he says a lot of people have suddenly come to him and found a real interest in his translation project of the original Ktav Old Testament manuscripts from the Lishana Atika Sabreya, the sacred scribal language of God, that which he spoke to Adam and Eve in the garden, and the minute the Tower of Babel spoke, and also the Galilean Aramaic New Testament manuscripts in the language that Jesus spoke, the Galilean Aramaic, and his disciples also. We're not saying all of them did, but Peter was a Galilean fisherman. There's probably a couple of other ones there, his brothers. And then there's probably Matthew, who was a Greek, right, tax collector. So somebody there wrote it down, what Jesus said, what he did, what he taught them, what they saw, etc., as a testimony. And then when the church at Jerusalem was destroyed, they ran with them. Okay, Thomas had already founded the Apostolic Church of the original ancient, very old. Okay. And he gave these texts to the high priest, the ordained high priest, selected high priest of that particular church, and instructed them on exactly how the church should be run, according to what Christ had taught them, all this sort of stuff. Okay, and then they'll pass it on to the next ones, and then they'll pass it down to the next ones over the centuries. Okay, so we're going to listen to this lecture. We did spend some time checking out why our sound was crackly, etc., etc., and we believe it's this front light here is indicating on our computer that something was running in the background, so it might have been the updates coming down, all right? But yeah, we actually might blame it on these speakers, they're cheap speakers, because our other one, surround sound cord, we broke when we inserted it into the front sound card. But we discovered, this is technicians, right? Yeah, you learn this stuff, but you don't learn that sort of stuff. That we could stick it in the onboard slot at the back. Yeah, but we have to go and replace that. We've got two of the cords which we broke, so we have to go buy another, only $2 up the road. So cheap, right? So we're going to go and do that today. Okay, so we're going to listen to this audio. Hopefully we don't have any crackling problems or anything like that. And hopefully it's loud enough so you can hear it.
Sit here. You can leave anytime you want, by the way. Okay.
I haven't even started.
Okay.
I'm going tomorrow.
So here we are at 10:43 p.m. The second night of Hanukkah, 5783. We're going to be talking about Ktav Ivri, which is one of the greatest inventions in the history of humanity. Most people never even heard of Ktav Ivri, but if you've heard of the Aleph base, or if you've heard of the ABCs, or even if you're a person studying physics or mathematics in some far-off corner of the world where you haven't heard of the ABCs or the Aleph base, and you heard of alpha rays, beta rays, and gamma rays, and you heard of delta functions, so you heard 4 letters that ultimately come from Ktav Ivri. So one of the questions that we're going to ask, or that I'm going to ask, maybe you've asked already, is where did this Aleph base come from? When did it arise? Why did it arise? Who put it together? These are questions that most people would think are unanswerable. Or if they are answerable, it's so much conjecture it's hardly worth it. But we're going to look at this carefully, and we're going to show, more than anyone has shown before, that these questions have relatively good answers. And you are going to help make them even better. But before I get into the details of this, I want to say something from one of our most universally loved and respected rabbis of the last several hundred years, from the Chofetz Chaim. 34 years ago, I had an opportunity to meet the Chofetz Chaim's last personal secretary, Rabbi Yitzchak Pufko, in Brooklyn. He was about 80 years old at the time, and he taught me 3 things in the name of his beloved rabbi, Yisro Meir HaKohen. That's the actual name of the Chofetz Chaim. The Chofetz Chaim is the name of one of his books on the laws of speech. The second of the 3 things that he told me in the name of his great teacher was a true teacher of Torah encourages his students to ask questions and is not afraid of apparent contradictions. So I hope you listening, if you have any questions at all about this subject, I hope that you'll ask them. You could ask them through email, or you could ask them live through this Zoom system. But I hope that you'll ask them. And between and among us, I hope that we'll be able to come up with some good answers and make this book on Ktav Ivri even better so that people could benefit from it even more all over the world. Now, let's look at the first letter. The first letter is Aleph. In Greek, it's Alpha. In English, or in the Latin alphabet, it's A. A is just a sound, or just a shape. It really doesn't mean anything. Alpha in Greek is very nice if you want to name some particles, alpha particles. But alpha in Greek doesn't mean anything as a word. Aleph in Hebrew, which is the name of the letter in Hebrew today and in Ktav Ivri, as far as we know, means at least 4 things. One of them is horned cattle. One of them is 1,000. One of them is a prince. And one of them is an educational program. What do these 4 things have in common? Any idea? Well, in the days of the creation of the Aleph base, a person who had 1,000 cattle was a prince. That might be tied together for those 3. And when we have people going the way of the herd, that might be some kind of an educational program. But why is Aleph the first letter? I mean, it has a nice sound, but why is it the first letter? So if you see a picture of the Aleph base, it looks like the head of a behemoth, the head of a bull. The mouth end of the bull is facing to the left, and you can imagine a narrow U shape with the rounded part being the mouth end facing to the left, and toward the right end you have a short line crossing the U and extending outward on both sides. So this leaves the ends of the U sticking out to the right. Those are the horns of the head of a bull. What looks like that? Does a bull really look like that? Well, there are constellations that look something like this. And one of them in particular looks just like the head of a bull, as shown in Ktav Ivri. What is the name of that constellation? Any idea? Well, from the name of the letter, meaning some kind of a bull, it might be the constellation Taurus, which means a bull, like toro in Spanish. And in Hebrew, it's shor, which means a bull. If you look at the constellation, you'll see that it looks pretty much just like the Aleph in Ktav Ivri. It does not look like the Aleph, at least the head of Mazel Shor, the bull, doesn't look like the Aleph that we have today. So why would anyone make the first letter of the Aleph base look like a part of a constellation? Why that particular constellation? So that constellation is one of the constellations of the zodiac. The zodiac is the system of constellations that rise with the sun during different months of the year, more or less lined up with the sun during different months of the year. Now, Taurus, in the time of Avraham Avinu, lined up with the sun at a very distinctive time of the year. it lined up with the sun at the time of the spring equinox, the beginning of the year for the Jewish people. Now let's skip along to the seventh letter. The seventh letter is Zion. And most people know what the Zion looks like in the Aleph base, and most people have really no idea what it looks like in Ktav Ivri. And if they've looked at some scholarly sources on the appearance of the Zion in Ktav Ivri, they might learn that the oldest, or seemingly the oldest, continuous text in Ktav Ivri has a Zion that looks like a capital I in English. Capital I with two short parallel lines and a long, straight vertical line between them, just like a capital I in English today. That's very nice if you want a nice compact system of letters so you could get as many letters as possible on a sarcophagus to sing the praises of whoever is buried in that sarcophagus. And that type of letter is what's found on a stone sarcophagus of a person who was buried about 3,000 years ago. A person who was not Jewish, but he used Ktav Ivri, as did many people in those times and places. The land of Canaan, as it's called, northwest Mesopotamia, and this particular place is Byblos, in a coastal city on the Mediterranean in Lebanon. But if you look at the oldest inscription as far as known Hebrew writing is concerned of Jewish people, it's not as old as the Byblos inscription, but the Zion looks very different. This is the inscription in the water tunnel right here in Yerushalayim, near the old city. 142 years ago, a 4-line inscription cut in the stone in small letters, only about 1.5 centimeters high, was found in that water tunnel. The letters are neatly made. The letters are well formed, and there are 4 Zions in that inscription. What do the Zions look like in that inscription? Now, the archaeologists and the experts say that that inscription is 200 or 300 years younger than that oldest inscription I just described, where the Zion looks like a capital I. What does the Zion look like in this well-known inscription, the so-called Cheskiyah Tano inscription? Well, it looks like 2 long parallel lines, longer than the average width of an average letter in Ktav Ivri, and 1 short vertical line between them. Very different from the capital I look. Now, would anybody who has a nice capital I look switch to a space-wasting, whatever it is look? A long, wide letter with a short vertical line between them? I don't think so. So what is that a picture of? I should say that all the letters in Ktav Ivri, unlike the letters in the ABCs and unlike the letters in the Aleph base, all of the letters are actually pictures of things. Not detailed works of art, but enough of a picture that when you see that letter, you're reminded of that thing. Just as that picture of the head of a behemoth reminds you of a behemoth. It doesn't even have an eye in it. I mean a dot for an eye. But it reminds you enough that this is a head of a behemoth for you to know that the name of this letter is Aleph, and the sound that goes with it has to do with the first sound of the word Aleph. So what is that thing that has 2 long horizontal parallel lines and a short vertical line between them? So if we knew nothing about the Aleph base or Ktav Ivri, we could probably be guessing all day, and your guess would be as good as mine. But we have a good idea now that Aleph lines up with Mazel Shor, with the equinox in the spring. So what's in the 7th month? If the equinox is in Nisan, what will we find in the 7th month? Tishrei. What's in Tishrei? The names, by the way, of the months, that's another question. But if the first month is Nisan, and Nisan has the vernal equinox, the spring equinox, lining up with Mazel Shor, lining up with Aleph, what's going to be in the 7th month? That's right. Zev says another equinox. The autumnal equinox, for those of us in the northern hemisphere. The autumnal equinox, what does that mean? It means the balance of night and day. Now, if you think of the picture that I painted, two long horizontal lines and a short vertical line between them, and you have in mind that Aleph is lined up with the equinox in Nisan, and the 7th month, Zion being the 7th letter, has the equinox of the fall in the northern hemisphere. So what could that be a picture of? You want to take a guess, Zev? Okay, that could very well be a seesaw, or it could be a balance scale. Now, our ancestors were not only shepherds, but they sold things. And very often they sold things by weight. And they would have to weigh those things. Now, if what you were doing is changing gold and silver, so you would have a rather delicate sort of balance scale. But if you were buying bushels of grain and trading 50-pound bales of wool, you would want a heavy, sturdy balance scale, something that's close to the ground. And that is what I think Zion is a picture of. So now we have two possible explanations of these two letters. These two letters appear to be linked to Shemayim, linked to the stars. Let's get to something more simple, more obvious. What about the second letter? B in English or Latin alphabet. What is it in Greek? Beta. What is it in Hebrew? Base. Base. What does base mean in Hebrew? House. Right. Base means house. So why would base be the second letter? So while we're thinking of that, let's go to the third letter. The third letter is Gimel. Now there are some people who think that the first group of letters has something to do with the house and home, because the fourth letter is Dalet, and Dalet means door. So the second letter means house. The fourth letter is Dalet, Dalet means door. This has something to do with a house. What is a camel? A gimel. Gimel sounds like camel, doesn't it? What does a camel have to do with a house? You might say nothing, and you might be absolutely right. But why am I sitting here talking to you about this? Because about a year ago, I was learning Megillah with the Daf Yomi program, and I came across this question of Ktav Ivri. And I looked at the letters, and I saw Dalet. And what does Dalet look like in Ktav Ivri? It looks like an equilateral triangle sitting on its base. And what does it mean? It means door. So what did that tell me? That told me that, we learned that our Abos, Avraham, for example, lived in a tent. And coming from America, thinking of tents, I think of teepees. I thought of teepees. I thought this is an indication that our Abos, our ancestors like Avraham, lived in tents, and they had triangular doors. On the one hand, they lived in a house, and on the other hand, they lived in a tent. That's what I thought it was. And then I saw the Dalet according to the Samaritans. So the sages of the Talmud say that the Samaritans in their day, that is close to 2,000 years ago, were using Ktav Ivri. So I looked at the Samaritan Dalet, and what does it look like? It looks like a trapezoid. It has four sides. It looks like that same equilateral triangle with the top cut off, and a few things sticking out on the side here and there to make it more interesting and more different from the plain triangle. So I thought, well, maybe the Samaritans have it right, and the Ktav Ivri that we have is not right. And then I realized something that's very important here. Just as the Aleph has no dot to indicate an eye, or even two eyes, maybe the Dalet doesn't represent a realistic picture of a door, but just enough of a picture that we'll remember that it's a picture of a door. So the doors of, for example, the ohel of the Mishkan, the tent of the Mishkan, they're rectangular. And the doors of Bedouin tents are rectangular. And the people who live in teepees have triangular doors, but Avraham Avinu probably lived in a tent that was similar to a Bedouin tent with a rectangular door. So what's so special about a rectangular door that would go with Dalet as the fourth letter? Any guesses, Ev? What is there about a rectangular door that would put that letter in the fourth place? That's right. An ordinary door has 4 sides. So that made me think, wow, maybe the reason Dalet is the 4th letter is because it has 4 sides, not because it's related to a house. So if a Dalet is the 4th letter because it has 4 sides, what about Gimel, camel? What is there about a camel that has to do with 3? So if you've been around Jerusalem, you might have seen some camels, and you might have even ridden on one. Or if you've seen pictures of camels in Arabia, you have some idea of what a camel looks like in Arabia. But our ancestors didn't initially come from Arabia. They came from Harran, northwest Mesopotamia. What did camels look like in northwest Mesopotamia in the time of Avraham Avinu? So, for close to 100 years, the archaeologists said, and archaeologists have contributed a lot to our understanding of Ktav Ivri and many other things. The archaeologists said those stories of Avraham with the camels in the Torah and the Bible, they can't be right. This is what the archaeologists say. I'm not saying this. Because there are no pictures of camels in the tombs of the Egyptians from that time period. With all the pictures of all the different animals that they have, giraffes, hippopotamus, all kinds of things like that, there are no pictures of camels in the time that we associate with Avraham Avinu. Therefore, said the archaeologists for roughly 100 years, those stories, God forbid, lo leinu, those stories are not true. So, just over a year ago, a very nice scholarly book was published, Camels in the Biblical World. And what do they show in this book, Camels in the Biblical World, by a major scholarly publishing house? They show that there were domesticated camels in northwest Mesopotamia. And what did these camels look like? They did not look like the camels that you find in Arabia. They were not one-hump camels. They were two-hump camels. And those of you who don't know what a two-hump Bactrian camel looks like can look it up however you can, or you could consult my book. But basically, the humps in a two-hump Bactrian camel have the same visual impact as the neck and head of the two-humped Bactrian camel. The Bactrian camel is a walking example of 3. And it's the 3rd letter. Well, I might be onto something here. What about the 5th letter? The 5th letter is Zev. You know the 5th letter? Hey. 5th letter is Hey. If you see Hey in Ktav Ivri, it looks like a line slanting from the lower right to the upper left, and coming perpendicular to that slanted line for the upper half of it are 3 lines a little shorter than the original slanted line. What is that a picture of? It certainly doesn't have 5 things in it. That looked to me like a picture of a wool comb. Our ancestors were shepherds. They plucked wool and they sold wool. And after you pluck the wool, you have to comb it to get the dirt out, to straighten the fibers and things like that. So I thought that hay is a picture of a wool comb. Now, how do we comb wool? Do we do it with our feet? Do we hold this implement in our teeth? No, we do it with our hands. And one hand is all it takes to hold that device, to comb the wool. So I thought the reason it's the 5th letter is because this is something that we do with one hand, which has 5 fingers. So I proceeded like this through the aleph base. And the yud is fairly simple. The yud in Ktav Ivri means a finger. There are 10 fingers. And what is the number of the letter yud in the sequence of the letters in the aleph base? 10, right. So that seems to be on target. Now, The next letter is Chaf. Chaf is a hand. So a hand seems to be associated with a hand of hands with 10 fingers. And I thought maybe it's no longer the number in the sequence of letters. Maybe it's just an association with the previous letter or with the letter that follows. What's the letter that follows Kaf? Lamed. What is a Lamed? What does Lamed mean? Lamed is a shepherd's staff. How do we hold a shepherd's staff? With our hand. So we hold the shepherd's staff with our hand. And what do we do with the shepherd's staff? The next letter is Mem. What does Mem stand for? What does it mean? What does it look like in Ktav Ivri? In Ktav Ivri, it looks like ripples of water. So the shepherds would lead the sheep to and from water. What's the next letter after Mem? Nun. What does Nun mean in Aramaic? So in Hebrew, there's only one word for fish, dag. In Sumerian, one of the ancient languages of southeast Mesopotamia, but not northwest Mesopotamia, they had something like 50 different words for fish. And one of the words, both in Sumerian and in more closely related Aramaic, is nun. So the fish are in the water. So this looks like this Seder of the letters is not arbitrary. It's not, as Professor Dembski and 100 years before him, Professor Evans, a fellow of the Royal Society, said that the first group of letters is related to the house. The letters are related in the first 10 primarily to the number that's most associated with that letter. And after that, each of the letters is more associated with the letters before and after. Some of these letters, though, were very difficult to find an association. We've already said that the seventh letter is a balance scale and is tied with the seventh month. But what about Vav? Six, the sixth letter. Is that tied to anything that has to do with six? So it may be that one of you listening could come up with a good explanation of what there is about the letter Vav that's attached to the number 6. But Vav means a hook. Vav means a connection. And what does it suggest? It's a connection between the combed wool and the balance scale. It's not necessarily representing 6 of anything, but the link between the combed wool and the balance scale. What's the 9th letter? Zev, you remember the what? Tes. Tes. What does Tes look like in Ktav Ivri? It's a circle with an X in it, where the tips of the X just touch and don't cross the circle. What is that a picture of? So, if we've combed the wool and we weighed the wool, what else would we do with the wool? Bearing in mind this is the 9th letter, not the 8th letter. What else would we do with the wool? You might spin it into yarn. And if you spun it into yarn, you might make balls of yarn. And what might that circle with an X be? I'm not the first one to say this. Some experts more than 70 years ago said it. I should be able to give their names. They're in the book. They say it's a ball of yarn. So why would a ball of yarn be the 9th letter? Any ideas? So who in the Torah, in the making of the Mishkan, actually made the yarn? Were they boys? Were they girls? Were they men? Were they women? Who made the yarn? Who spun the yarn? Women. It's women's work. Anybody can spin yarn. But in the Torah it explicitly says that the women spun the yarn. What number is most associated with adult women? 9. That's right. 9. And Tes is the 9th letter. So, the letters are not all so simple. And maybe you'll disagree with some of these explanations that I've given so far. But one of the most difficult was the letter that comes after Nun. It stopped with Lamed Mem Nun. And we could even remember Kuf Lamed Mem Nun, K-L-M-N. The letters K-L-M-N in the English or Latin alphabet are the same shape and the same sound as the letters in Ktav Ivri. Though in Ktav Ivri, the letters are written as the text is also written from right to left, so the K is facing in the opposite direction, the L is facing in the opposite direction. But those letters K, L, M, N come straight from Ktav Ivri. So the letter following Nun is very, very difficult for two reasons. What is the letter following Nun? Samach. Samach. What does a Samach look like today? It looks like a circle. What does it look like in Ktav Ivri? Well, if you can imagine a vertical line with the top half of the vertical line having three shorter horizontal lines crossing it. So you have one crossing it at the top, so there's nothing from the vertical line protruding above the top horizontal line. Then I have another one a bit under that, and a third horizontal line a bit under that. So you can look at that picture and say, well, that's clearly a telephone pole. Our ancestors had telephone poles. Or you could say, that looks much more like a tree. Now, before I understood that it looked like a tree, I looked at what is supposedly the oldest Ktav Ivri inscription, the one from that sarcophagus, and there it's a vertical line with three horizontal lines crossing it, but there is a piece sticking up at the top and an equal piece sticking down at the bottom. And I looked at that and I said, what is that a picture of? And I couldn't really make it out. And it was more difficult because the Samach today is a circle. So I imagine maybe it's a walled and well-watered trellised vineyard. That would explain why it's near the water. That would explain the circle. That would explain this unusual shape from that sarcophagus. And I thought, well, maybe it's a fish cage. Maybe they trapped fish. So Nun Samach, the fish cage. So I called an expert on fish cages in the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, and I got some feedback from that person. But somehow I didn't think that they would make this letter a fish cage. And then I saw what the letter actually looked like in Ktav Ivri, not from that Biblos inscription. And just as by looking at the actual Ktav Ivri letter for Zion, we could see that it's a balance scale and has nothing to do with the capital I, so also when I looked at that letter for Ktav Ivri that I said jokingly, it looks like a telephone pole, I understood it's a picture of a tree. Now, all the letters have an initial sound. All the names of the letters have an initial sound that you understand from the name of the letter. So the initial sound of bass is a B sound. The initial sound of Gimel is a G sound. A Dalet, a D sound. So if this is a picture of a tree, what kind of a sound does a tree make? So I thought, it's the wind. When the wind blows through the tree, it makes a distinctive sound. Not like an S, but like and maybe the name for a horse, which has a samach at the beginning and a samach at the end, has to do with the way the horse runs like the wind. Maybe. I don't know. So why would a tree be next to water? Well, trees grow by water. The next letter is what? What comes after samach? Ayin. So ayin means an eye, but it also means a well or a spring. So trees grow by water, trees grow by springs. And I thought, and you could spot a spring far off by the trees that are growing near it. And we have trees growing by the water as an expression in Torah. So it seems that tree would be okay next to water, next to spring. Samach ayin pei. Pei. Pei is mouth. What's the mouth doing there? The next letter is Tzadik, or Tzadi. What's that? So, some experts close to 70 years ago, I should put in the names and particulars, said that Tzadi is a fishing pole and line. So, what kind of a story do we have that connects Mem, Nun, Samach, Ayin, Pei, Tzadik? And the next letter is Kuf. Now, Kuf means monkey. And some people say, and have said and published in books, that the Kuf in Ktav Ivri, which looks like a circle with a line going through it from the top of the circle through the bottom of the circle and continuing down almost as much as the diameter of the circle itself, some people say, well, that's obviously a picture of a monkey. And Kuf means monkey. But there were no monkeys in northwest Mesopotamia in the time of Avraham Avinu. What else could Kuf mean? And how is it connected with Nun, Samach, Ayin, Pei, Tzadik? So I'll leave you to think about that for a moment, or even longer than a moment, while we look at where this invention may have taken place. So, Avraham Avinu came from Harran. Does anyone know where Harran is? Is it a real place? Can you find it on a map? Do you have any idea where it is? Don't be afraid to say no.
Somewhere between Eastern Turkey and West Syria.
Somewhere between Eastern Turkey and Western Syria. That's very good. It's actually, if you drew a line from the corner of the, if you drew a line from the northeast corner of the Mediterranean, straight across the southern part of Turkey in that area, you would pass through a number of distinctive cities on what was 4,000 years ago a main road. And more than 100 miles east of that point of departure on the Mediterranean coast, you would cross the Euphrates, and you would come to the city of Harran. Harran in Akkadian means two things. The primary meaning is a crossroads. The secondary meaning is a caravan. It was a caravan crossroads, a major caravan crossroads for those traveling in the east-west direction from the Mediterranean to Nineveh, or those traveling in the north-south direction, possibly from an extension of the Silk Road to China, through the mountains, down through Harran, and down further to the Euphrates River. Harran was not a trivial place. Harran still exists. Harran was visited by Binyamin ben Yonah of Tudela about 800 years ago. He says there were 20 Jews there. But what's so special about Harran? And why would the Aleph base, as I believe, originate in a place like Harran? So Harran is not just the name of a place, a crossroads, caravans. Harran was possibly the world capital of some very, very distinctive people, the priests of the moon god. There's a professor at Lehman College in New York who wrote a whole book on the priests of the moon god of Harran. And she tried to understand that the moon god had something to do with women. But the moon god was a man with horns, or at least he wore a helmet that looked like horns that looked like the horns of a bull, or actually maybe the crescent of a moon. So in the Torah, Harran is referred to as Arza B'nai Kedem. It's a very unusual name for a place. The land of the children of the East. Where did these priests of the moon god come from? they did not develop their moon god business in Harran. They developed their moon god business or way of life or belief system in a city close to 1,000 kilometers to the southeast, a city that most of you have heard of, a city that has a name in the Bible, in the Torah. The city's name is Ur. In the Torah, it's referred to as Ur-Kasdim. So Ur-Kasdim may not be the city that's so far to the southeast in Mesopotamia and on the wrong side of the river. Ur-Kasdim might have been a place near Harran. And what was Harran? Harran was an outpost, a business city of the big city of Ur, so far away to the southeast. So why would any group of reasonable people become priests of the moon god? And why would they have the strength in their system to remain in the city of Harran for more than 3,000 years until they were destroyed by the Mongols, roughly a century after Benjamin Ben Yonah of Tudela visited that city? For 3,000 years, the priests of the moon god dominated that city. What was going on in Ur, so far away, that might have generated this strength of the priests of the moon god? Do you have any idea where the old city of Ur was? Right, in southeast Mesopotamia, in Iraq, near the Euphrates River. But today, it's about 200 kilometers from the Persian Gulf. Where was that city 5,000 years ago? Or between 4,000 and 5,000 years ago? Now, cities have a way of just sort of staying where they are. If I say that it was 200 kilometers from the Persian Gulf today, that is, the ruins of the city are 200 kilometers from the Persian Gulf today, well, you would imagine that it would have been 200 kilometers from the Persian Gulf 4,000 or 5,000 years ago. But it wasn't. 4,000 or 5,000 years ago, it was right on the edge of the Persian Gulf. And the Persian Gulf, unlike the Mediterranean, has tides. And the land around that city of Ur was very low and flat and marshy. Not only did the Persian Gulf have tides, but the Persian Gulf, until recently, had tidal bores. What's a tidal bore? That's when the tide not only comes in and goes out, but when it comes in like a wave, several times higher than its ordinary increase in height, and runs up the river. So imagine living in a city on the edge of the Persian Gulf, where you had such a situation where the tides, the ordinary tides, went up a meter and down a meter, an amplitude, a total change of 2 meters in the depth of the water twice a day. And on top of that, you had waves that ran up the river. Well, if you didn't know the pattern of those tides and those tidal bores, you could set out walking in one direction and end up, God forbid, drowned. Or you could set out in a boat in one direction and end up being washed out to sea. So it was imperative for those people to understand the pattern of those tides. And they did a very good job of it. And they tied the tides to what? To the moon. The moon is the primary element that affects the tides. The sun also affects the tides. And the level of the tides varies according to whether it's a full moon, a new moon, a half moon, or what time of the year it is. And they worked this out. They became great mathematicians. They became great astronomers. They were able to predict eclipses. They were able to predict conjunctions of planets, when planets line up. They were able to predict when the planets lined up with the different constellations. And then they got a little confused. They imagined that just as the moon and the sun, and seemingly the position of the moon and the sun with respect to the planets, has an effect on the tides, so also the moon, the sun, the constellations have an effect on the life of people. So that depending on when a person is born, under what star, it will affect their life. because they could predict eclipses, because they could predict conjunctions, because they were very good mathematicians and astronomers, they put this belief over on other people and stuck with it for more than 3,000 years. So what happened at the time that might be associated, that's at the time of the life of Avraham Avinu, or before the time of Avraham Avinu, roughly 100 years before the life of Avraham Avinu, or the time of Avraham Avinu, the city of Ur was attacked and destroyed. The temple of the moon god, the main temple of the city of Ur, was destroyed. Not so much that the archaeologists couldn't see that it was really a big deal, but the moon god priests had their temple destroyed, their city destroyed, and where did they go? Any ideas, Ev? Harran. Harran was already an outpost of Ur. So the moon god priests of Ur went to Harran, and they became the leaders of Harran in the time of the Academy of Shlemeh and Ivri, shortly before the time of Avraham Avinu. So what did that mean to the students of God, the students of Torah as we know it, the students who don't believe that the stars dictate your life from the time you were born? That meant that they have to do something to defend the ideas of the ways of God from the moon god priest of Harran. How could they do that? One way they could do it is make sure that the stories and ideas of the Torah, which at that time consisted of the first chapters of Bereshit, of Genesis, that those stories were known very well to every adult and child in the community of the Bnei Torah, of the sons of the Torah. How are they going to go about this? So in those days, there were several different writing systems, but the writing systems were of a nature that you had to study for years to learn how to write and to read. They were cuneiform systems with hundreds of characters, and scholars spent years in school studying how to be a cuneiform scribe. The students of Shlemeh and Ivri had to develop a system that even a child could learn quickly while walking. He doesn't have the time to sit in school. There were no schools. So they put together this Ktav Ivri system, which when you look at the letters, you see that it's such a beautifully constructed system that a child or adult could learn to recognize the letters and read those letters in a matter of hours while walking. Each letter has a sound that's associated with its picture. And if you've forgotten what letter comes next, you have reminders from the number of the letter, from the numbers of the letters before and after, from the names of the letters before and after. And as a result, you have a system with multiple mnemonic, didactic character built into the letters themselves and their organization. It was a system that could be not only learned quickly, but one could learn to write it also with relative ease. It might take much more time to learn to write it than to read it, but still in a relatively short amount of time, not while walking, but while sitting, even if it's sitting on a camel, you could learn to write the 22 letters of Ktav Ivri. Now there's something special about Ktav Ivri that wouldn't work with other languages. Ktav Ivri has almost no vowels, but the nature of Hebrew and the languages that are associated with Hebrew are such that you don't need the vowels if you know the language. You also don't need two letters where one letter will do. We have, for example, the second letter is not only base, but it's vase. It has two sounds. With a dot in the letter, it's a base. Without a dot, it's a vase. And those who know the language without the dots can tell pretty much whether it should be pronounced as a base or a vase. So they were able to keep the number of letters to a relatively small number, 22 in all, so that an adult or child could learn it quickly. So thus far, we've answered some questions about the meaning of each letter, the shape of each letter, though I haven't gone through all 22 letters, where this is most likely invented, why it was most likely invented there, and by whom it was most likely invented. Now, there are some obvious questions. Maybe Zev has an obvious question, but one of the most obvious questions is, well, where's the evidence? We're talking about something that happened close to 4,000 years ago, and the first evidence that we have of the complete olive base is in the city of Ugarit, close to 700 years later. So that seems to just fly in the face of the idea that Ktav Ivri was invented close to 4,000 years ago in the time of Avraham Avinu. So before we address this question, let's look at the Torah to see whether there's any hint in the Torah of when this system of writing was invented. We have Avraham Avinu sending his chief steward, Eliezer of Damascus, to find a wife for Yitzchak, for Avram's daughter. And the Torah says that Eliezer of Damascus was carrying all the property of Avraham Avinu in his hand. So our sages of the Talmud say, what does that mean? He's carrying all the property of Avraham Avinu in his hand. It means that he was carrying a document showing what property Avraham Avinu was willing to give for this young woman, Rivka, to be the bride, to be the life partner of Yitzchak. That meant that Avraham Avinu knew how to write the document, and that the people he's sending Eliezer of Damascus to visit knew how to read the document. This is pretty much all we have from the Torah. And in contrast to that, we have the situation when Avraham Avinu bought a burial place for Sarah Imonu, for Sarah our mother. In a piece in the Torah of roughly 250 words, equivalent in English, there's not a mention of any kind of writing whatsoever. This would suggest that they had no writing. But when you realize that this is Abraham dealing with the children of Heth, what it means is that the children of Heth had no writing. Avraham Avinu could have had writing, but what good would it do Avraham Avinu to write something if the children of Heth couldn't read it? The children of Heth had a traditional system of exchanging property where the properties was exchanged in public before the council of the city. And that's what went on in the sale of Miyaras HaMachpelah to Avraham Avinu for a burial place. Now, what about this 700-year gap? 700 years between the time I'm hypothesizing, I'm conjecturing, the students of Shem and Ever developed this system of writing, and the first evidence that we have of the complete Aleph base in Ugarit, 700 years. Most people would say it's ridiculous to postulate that there was a 700-year gap between the invention of something so great and the first physical evidence of it. You think that's a reasonable statement, that it's almost ridiculous? So we have an example a little nearer to our time. The invention of a new system of writing for the people by the king of Korea. King Seljong the Great invented a system of writing which today is used by 80 million people in Korea, both the northern part of Korea and the southern part of Korea. And the idea of the king was that the people, all the people, should be able to learn how to read and write, particularly the Confucian writings. He believed that it was very important that as many people, as a higher percentage of the population as possible, should understand the wisdom of Confucius. But the people in Korea spoke Korean, and the writings of Confucius were written in Chinese. And the Chinese system of writing, the Chinese language, just didn't fit the Korean language. The Korean language is very, very different from Chinese. So the king himself invented a new system of writing with a relatively limited number of letters based on phonetic characteristics, not symbols like the Chinese letters. And he tried to make it not only so that these letters had phonetic character, but the letter itself would show you how to hold your mouth and tongue in pronouncing the letter. It was a brilliant system. What evidence do we have, carved in stone, that survives to this day from that great invention of the King of Korea in the early 15th century? What about the king's own tomb? On the king's own tomb, there's not a single character in this new writing system anywhere connected with his tomb. For the next 5 generations of kings, there is not a single character connected with this new system of writing, connected with their tombs. Where is the first example of something carved in stone from this new language? It was 90 years after it was invented. It was on a tombstone, carved in stone. And what does it say? It says, essentially, it has 2 inscriptions. One inscription is in Chinese, and one inscription is in this new writing. And it says, essentially, anyone who could read this is an idiot and shouldn't touch this stone. And what happened shortly after the king invented this great system of writing? One of his successors discovered that the people were protesting his bad behavior. And how were they doing it? They were holding up signs written in this new writing system. So the new king became irate and decided to suppress the new writing system. And what might we expect from the scribal schools in the days of Avraham, who spent years learning to write in cuneiform? We might expect them to react the same way, that their investment of years in learning to write cuneiform was being threatened by this new system. So they might have resisted it within their own scribal schools. On what was this new writing written? Was it carved in stone? Where do we have the first example carved in stone in the Torah? The first example carved in stone was the Luchos themselves. When Joshua wrote out the Torah on stone, he didn't actually write it on the stone, he wrote it in plaster on the stone. It was very difficult to carve in stone before people had iron tools. Copper tools would wear out very quickly if you carve things in stone. But our ancestors didn't carve in stone, our ancestors wrote on animal skins. And animal skins, since they were shepherds, were easily obtained. The writing system was designed to be written on animal skins, and the animal skins were very portable. There was no need for them to write in stone, and since they were not keeping major business records, they didn't have to write in clay or anything like that. They could write on sheepskin. Sheepskin doesn't last long, but the ideas written on the sheepskin could last for thousands of years. So this is the situation that we have. That we have a gap of 600 or 700 years, but the gap is explicable, is reasonable, based on the idea of the resistance of the scribal schools, and that this new writing system was not intended for the scribes at all. The new writing system was intended for the children of Avraham, for the children of the students of the Academy of Shlemeh and Adler. Now this writing system is called Ktav Ivri. It's not called Ktav Avraham. It's not called Ktav Yisrael. It's not called Ktav Noach or Ktav Adam. It's called Ktav Ivri. It is not the writing system only of the Jewish people. It's the writing system of all the descendants of the Academy of Shlemeh and Adler who wanted to resist the moon god priests, who wanted to promote Torah in the world, who wanted to promote something that they considered greater and higher than the ideology of the moon god priests. And it has something in common with technologies that we're developing today. Today, we understand that it's possible for small groups of people to dominate the systems of communication. So it's important for us today, and it has been important for us for many centuries, to develop information technologies that are intrinsically resistant to censorship. And this system of writing that anybody could learn, this system of Ktav Ivri, was invented with that idea, that those moon god priests, however powerful they were, would not be able to stop the spread of the ideas of God written in Ktav Ivri on animal skins. So today, the ancestors of Ktav Ivri are spread across the world. It's not only the Latin alphabet, or the Russian alphabet, or the Arabic alphabet that are descendants of Ktav Ivri, but even the people in China, who have a completely different writing system. Almost all the children in China today, and for the past 60 years or so, learn the Latin alphabet, or the English alphabet, or the most widely used descendant of Ktav Ivri, before they learn to read Chinese. And they use the letters K, L, M, N, A, B, C, D. They use those letters to learn to write Chinese. So, in the merit of our understanding this beautiful invention, so long ago, roughly 4,000 years ago, we should learn the ideas that it was intended to protect, to promote the ideas of godliness in the world, to defeat the ideas of the moon god priests who say that everything is dependent on your star, and to see the coming of the Mashiach, Tzidkenu b'mheira yemenu omein. Thank you very much. Any questions? How do you turn this off? How long did I talk?
No idea.
11:42. I think I spoke about an hour. So it goes off by itself?
No, thanks.
Okay, I spoke about an hour?
Recording? Yeah, there's an hour. Did you set up the recording?
Why did it turn off by itself? Maybe it erased itself also, I don't know. How did I do?
Very good.
Did you learn anything?
Yeah.
Wow, great. Wow.
To download Adler's book so that you can see what he's talking about for yourself without relying on his descriptions. I will place a copy of the link to download that book in the chat box. So in a moment you'll get the link in the chat box. You can download it there and you'll see the images and pictures that he might refer to in his lecture. If anybody has any questions, feedback, If anyone is interested in being updated about future events or has ideas for future events, you can contact me via email. My name is Reuven Chaim Klein, and my email address is historyofhebrew@gmail.com. That's historyofhebrew as one word @gmail.com. Before we start, I just wanted to thank Rabbi Reuven and Leah Subar for virtually hosting this session, and Hagoyin Harav Hamiti Zev Trenk for physically hosting this session. And without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, the Adler is in the building.
Press escape or double click to exit full screen mode. That's me. Looks like me. Okay. Shalom Aleichem, Avraham Chanukah. We're going to be talking about Ktav Ivri this evening. And some of you may have a copy of my book, but I don't. So this is going to be a little more interesting than usual. And I have here right in front of me 4 real live students. There may be more coming, and maybe some will leave in the middle. But this is Hanukkah. So even though we're talking about Ktav Ivri, and most discussions of Hanukkah have nothing to do, seemingly, with Ktav Ivri, anyone who gives a shir or a drasha should be used to connecting whatever they're going to talk about with whatever the day is that they're speaking on. So 8 is a very important number in Jewish tradition, and Hanukkah, of course, has to do with 8 lights, and there's a very important 8 that's connected with Ktav Ivri. There are 7 heavenly bodies that are readily observable: the Sun, the Moon, Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn, that move with respect to each other. And then there's another group of heavenly bodies, the fixed stars, that don't move with respect to each other. That's the 8th level. That's when Hashem tells Avraham to go out and count the stars. So shall your children be for greatness. The greatness of the children is not in their visible number, but in their seder with respect to each other, and with their seder with respect to the Derech Hashem. So we will see in this talk that astronomy is a very significant factor in the creation of Ktav Ivri. So the first thing we should do, in addition to a nice connection between Hanukkah and our subject, is say something from some of our sages. I met the last personal secretary of the Chofetz Chaim. The Chofetz Chaim is probably the most universally loved and respected rabbi of the last several hundred years. And the second of the 3 things that he taught me in the name of the Chofetz Chaim was: a true teacher of Torah encourages his students to ask questions and is not afraid of apparent contradictions. So if any of you sitting here in front of me, but not in front of the camera, or out there in Zoom land, have any questions or see any contradictions in what I say, I hope that you'll speak up or contact me directly. One of our great rabbis used to begin every shir with a joke. So it's an old joke, but I'll say it. There are 2 people walking in the countryside in New York. One is an ordinary, thoughtful, intelligent person, and one is a scientist. Some scientists are actually thoughtful, intelligent people. But in this case, the ordinary, thoughtful, intelligent person looks out over the grassy hill and he sees something there and he says, "I see a brown cow." What does the scientist say? He says, "I see what looks like the side of a cow, and the side that I see is brown." This is the so-called scientist. We are not going to be talking like that in this year. If we see something that looks like a brown cow, that's what we're going to call it. Now, it might be that it's just animatronics, that it's something fake, that it's something unusual. But the first understanding is that it's a brown cow. And if we find out something more than that, we'll plug that into the picture. So the first thing we need to look at is the name Ktav Ivri. What do we see in this name? We see that it's not called Ktav Adam, not called Ktav Noach, not called Ktav Avraham. It's called Ktav Ivri. So where do we have this expression before Ktav Ivri? Any hands here? Or Ivri? Where do we have Ivri before? Yosef, right. Yosef, Ivri, and before that? Avraham. Avraham Ivri. Why was Avraham called Avraham Ivri? The sages of the Talmud say was three things. One was that he came from the other side of the Euphrates, from the area of Harran. Another was that he stood on one side, and the whole world, when it came to Derech Hashem, stood on the other. And the third was that he was connected with the school of Shem and Eber. He was actually a descendant of Eber. So it may be that when the sages of the Talmud call this system of writing Ktav Ivri, they have something similar in mind, that it came from the area of Harran, the other side of the Euphrates River, that it was unique in the world. It stood on one side as far as writing systems are concerned, and all other writing systems stood on the other side. And it had something to do with Eber and his school. So what was going on in that part of the world at the time of Avraham Avinu? My sense is that this system of writing originated in the time of Avraham Avinu. And what evidence do we have of that? First, we'll look at the first letter. But before we look at the first letter, I'll give you a sense of how I got involved in this. All of us know the Aleph base, and some of us may have seen studies like the study of Professor Dembski of Bar Ilan University, who groups the letters, the first several letters, and says they have to do with the home. And then he makes other groups of letters like Mem and Nun, they have to do with water. And he makes several other groups like this. Now, if you look at that, the second letter is Beis, which certainly has to do with the home. And the fourth letter is Dalet, which certainly has to do with the home. But the third letter is Gimel. And there is a word God, which certainly has to do with the home or the house. And Gimel, whether it's a camel or a throw stick, has nothing to do with the home or the house. So I was looking through the letters, and since there's a reference to Ktav Ivri in Megillah, and I as a Daf Yomi person was learning Megillah, and Ktav Ivri is mentioned in Megillah. In fact, Rabbi Yossi ben Olafta, one of our greatest sages, says that everything was in Ktav Ivri up until the time of Ezra. The Ten Commandments were given in Ktav Ivri. Everything that was written before that, as far as the Jewish people were concerned, according to Rabbi Yossi ben Olafta, was written in Ktav Ivri. So that got me interested into looking at the specific letters. So I saw Aleph. Aleph, the first meaning is probably horned cattle. So this seems to be saying that our ancestors had some connection with horned cattle. Beis is a house, so they lived in houses. They could have lived in mud huts, but house. The third is Gimel, which I assume, contrary to what some Egyptologists say, has to do with camels. The Egyptologists say it has to do with the throw stick. And then I saw the fourth letter. The fourth letter is an equilateral triangle sitting on its base. And what did I think? That Dalet means door. So a triangle, a door. Where do you have any ideas of a triangle, a door? Where would you find a triangular door? Anybody? People are perplexed. A tent. What kind of tent? A teepee. So I thought, well, this is saying that our ancestors, our Avos, Avraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov, and their families not only lived in houses, but they lived in tents. We know that Avraham traveled around in a tent. Unlike what Josephus says, he did not greet his guests in the courtyard of his house. He was in the opening of his tent. So I thought, well, tent. That's what it is. It's an indication that we not only lived in houses, but we lived in tents. And then I saw the Samaritan version of Dalet. Now, those of you who have access to the visuals, which somehow got messed up today, will see that the Samaritan Dalet is a trapezoid. It's a triangle with the top cut off. And it has a few projections here and there, but it's got 4 sides. And that made me think that maybe the Samaritan letter is the correct shape that it should be, and maybe our triangular shape is somehow not right. But then I realized something. It turns out that that trapezoidal Samaritan letter is something that the Samaritans came up with several hundred years after the time that Tanaim said that our original language, at least Yossi ben Elafta and Eliezer ben Yaakov, said the original language, or the original writing system, was Ktav Ivri. They changed all the letters. But meanwhile, the 4-sided Dalet, that made me think of something. How many sides does an ordinary door have? We have one student who says 4, and one student, are you holding by 3? He's holding up 3 fingers, but he really means 4. So you're not counting the bottom as a side. The bottom of the door.
Or the bottom of the side.
Well, the door itself, the part that opens and closes, it's a piece of wood or metal or something like that, and if you look at it, it has a top, it has a bottom, it has a left and a right side. Of course, if you look at it from the other way, the left is the right, but that's not so important. So a door, an ordinary door, the part that opens and closes, not the part that the door fits into, but the part that opens and closes, that's what the Dalet refers to. The Dalet has 4 sides. And what is the number of the Dalet in the order of the alphabet? 4. It's the 4th letter. So maybe, it occurred to me, these letters are not necessarily associated with a house or with each other, at least among the first 10. Maybe they're associated with the number that's most closely associated with that word or that letter. So let's go back to Aleph. Why would Aleph be the first letter? How is that related to Hanukkah? I don't think I put this in my book. How is Aleph related to Hanukkah? How many Alephs are there in the word Hanukkah? So, if you look at the Ktav Ivri Aleph, it doesn't look like the Aleph today. Those of you who have a book can look at the table that has all the Ktav Ivri letters in one place. But the Ktav Ivri Aleph looks like the head of horned cattle. In fact, it looks almost exactly like the head of the constellation called Taurus, shore, a bull. That's interesting. So, most of you probably know that the constellations, we have some people walking in. Come and join us. So, most of us know that the constellations are very exact with respect to each other, but which constellation rises in which month changes slowly over the years. In the case of our lifetimes, it doesn't change by very much. But every 2,000 years, gradually, the constellations shift from one to another. And the constellation that rose with the sun at the time of Avraham Avinu, roughly 4,000 years ago, was Mazel Shor. So I said, maybe the reason Aleph in Ktav Ivri looks like the head of Mazel Shor and is the first letter, maybe that's why it is the first letter. Because the year begins for the Jewish people and for the people in Mesopotamia who were before the time of Avraham Avinu. One of the beginnings of the year is the spring equinox. So if the Aleph is connected with the spring equinox, that might account for why it's first. Now we'll skip a little bit to the 7th letter. Some of the students here may have heard what I said about the 7th letter. Anybody here remember anything about the 7th letter? What is the 7th letter? Zion. Zion is the 7th letter, you agree? There's Baruch Hashem, there's agreement that the 7th letter is Zion. Now, most of you know what a Zion looks like in
Zon.
Hebrew.
Some people call it Zon.
Okay, we have Rabbi Klein adding something that it's Zon and not Zion, as some people say. But meanwhile, what does it look like in Ktav Ivri? So if you look at the usual layouts of Ktav Ivri, of the oldest version of Ktav Ivri, which came from a sarcophagus of somebody who lived on the coast a non-Jew who lived on the coast of the Mediterranean about 3,000 years ago. It looks like a capital I. It's two short, let's see if I can get this in the picture, two short horizontal lines with a long vertical line between them, a capital I. What does it look like in the oldest inscription that we know is attributable to Jews, and where there was plenty of space to write? It's two long parallel lines like this with a short vertical line between them. So the paleographers, the experts on the history of writing, show that the oldest letter was this capital I look, and somehow it morphed into this long, space-wasting, flat, whatever it is look. That doesn't make a lot of sense. If you had a nice capital I look, there would be no reason to morph it into this, whatever it is, flat, wide, space-wasting look. But if you had a flat, wide, space-wasting letter, and you wanted to put as many praises as possible on the sarcophagus of your nearest and dearest dead buddy, you would use a capital I look, which is what we have from that sarcophagus. The oldest version of the Ktav Ivri Zion did not look like a capital I. It looked like this flat, wide, space-wasting, whatever it is. Now, if the Aleph is connected with the equinox in the spring in our lunar solar calendar system, what would be in the 7th month? Any guesses? What? Tishrei. Well, you start in Nisan, that's the spring, and the 7th month is Tishrei. So what would you find in the 7th month that might be Nogeo, might be relevant to this question? Okay, so some people think it might have to do with the constellations, but one of the clear characteristics of the 7th month is that if the 1st month has the equinox of spring, those of us in the northern hemisphere, the 7th month will usually have the equinox in the fall. And what is the equinox? It's the balance of day and night. In Rosh Hashanah, we talk about the balance of mitzvahs and averas. We should all increase in mitzvahs and decrease in averas. But the idea of a balance between day and night is an essential element of the 7th month. So this is the 7th letter, and we have this strange space-wasting look, these two long parallel lines with a short vertical line between them. So I guessed that that's a balance scale. It doesn't look like a capital I, but it seems to me that it's most likely a balance scale. Not a balance scale like the constellation Libra that we have today. The constellation Libra might not have been known, probably was not known as such 4,000 years ago. But a balance scale like our shepherd ancestors, who were also merchants, traveling up and down the mountains, depending on the season, and selling things that they got in the mountains to people who lived in the valleys. So when they sold things by weight. Or one of the ways to sell things is to sell things by weight. If you're selling sheep, you might sell them by number. But if you're selling wool or grain or wood or copper ore or something like that, you would sell it by weight. And you would put a bucket of whatever it is on one side that you're selling and a bucket of whatever it is that you're buying on the other side of your balance scale, maybe some holes to save you time in estimating the weight, and maybe some weights to put into the different buckets to figure out just how much you got there. And there you have a balance scale. So it seems that the number 7 in the case of the Zion and the shape of the letter is related to the 7th month, to the balance scale. So let's go to the 9th letter. So the 9th letter, does anybody know what the 9th letter looks like in Ktav Ivri? Wow, we have somebody here who has an actual phone, maybe could look them up. And a circle with an X in it. Does the X sit in the middle of the circle and not touch the edge, or does the X touch the edges of the circle?
This looks like it's touching edges.
Right. So you have a circle with an X that touches the edges of the circle, but doesn't go past the edge of the circle. So the understanding of scholars long before I was born is that it's probably a ball of yarn. So who makes yarn as far as the stories that we have in the Torah are concerned? We have Betzal ben Uri ben Hur. He made a lot of stuff. He worked in gold and wood and many other things. But what did he not work in? What did he not make? What did some other people make?
The females.
What? Females. Somebody jumped in and said females. Yes, the women, not just females, the adult women spun the wool or whatever needed to be spun. They spun it into thread. That was a woman's work type of thing. And what number is most closely associated with adult women? Any guesses? 9. Yes, very good. Those who stay up late on Pesach, on the Seder night, learn that 9 is connected with women. And so we have this ball of yarn connected with women. Now the next letter, I skipped a few. Don't worry, we'll get back to them. But the next letter is Yud. So Yud in Ktav Ivri is supposed to be a picture of a finger. Now, if you just drew a line for a finger, nobody would know what it is. So there's a somewhat elaborate sketch, but the result is that the sketch is a picture of a finger. Yud means finger. How many fingers are there on most people? Not Goliath and his chevra, but how many people have fingers? Most of us have fingers, Baruch Hashem, and most of us have 10 fingers. So the finger goes together with 10. Now I'm going to go back to the third letter. But before I do, the timing of the Aleph is important. The head of Mazel Shor connected with the equinox in the spring, not 2,000 years ago, not 3,000 years ago, but 4,000 years ago. What do we have in the Torah that suggests that a writing system was in the hands of Avraham Avinu at the time he left Harran? So, what? A deed, yes, a deed. So when he sent his chief assistant, domestic Eliezer, to find a wife for Rivka, the Torah says that domestic Eliezer was carrying all the wealth of Avraham Avinu in his hand. And Rav Chelbo says, what does that mean? What does it mean he's carrying all the wealth of Avraham Avinu in his hand? Did he have a bunch of diamonds in his hand? There were no diamonds in those days as far as we know, but what did he have in his hand? He had a document in his hand, a star. And what did the star say? The star said that he's going to give essentially a large amount of money for this bride for his son Yitzchak. What else does this mean? It means that when Avraham Avinu wrote that star, that document, he understood that the people on the other end could read it. That means that he understood that when he left Harran, he had that writing in his hand. And the people in Harran, in the neighborhood of Harran, could read that writing. So, by the standard of the scientists, the one who sees this side looks like a brown cow, this might be a bit of a stretch. And by any standard, it's an element of conjecture. But this is what we have to go on at this point. We have the timing of the Aleph, and we have the timing of Avraham Avinu leaving Harran, which are about the same. Now we're going to look at the third letter. The third letter is Gimel. Anybody have a question, whether it's Gimel or some other letter? No? Gimel, okay. It might be Gimel or Gimel, that's very good, because it does have actually two sounds. Very good, very good. So, the Egyptologists say that Gimel is a throw stick. The throw stick is an ancient word. It sounds just like Gimel, Gamal, the camel. It is found in ancient writings, but it's nowhere in the Bible. And our avos generally didn't kill birds with throw sticks. because if they did, they couldn't eat them. I mean, maybe they would go after a non-kosher bird, a vulture or something like that, and throw a throw stick at it, but I think they'd find some other way to get rid of the vulture. In any event, throw stick's not mentioned in the Bible at all. Camels are mentioned repeatedly. Now, for a very long time, close to a century, the experts, the Egyptologists, the archaeologists, looked at this gimel and all these stories of camels in the Bible, and they said, there are no camels inscribed in the tombs of the pharaohs or their assistants.
Hi, you're frozen.
Is it frozen for everybody as well?
Yeah.
That's frozen. New technology, I think, is having problems with old concepts.
Froze before that. Egyptologists said there is no record of camels in Egypt.
I think you're also on mute, Rabbi Adler.
You're on mute.
Hi. You're still muted. We want to hear you.
Wait. So we have somebody here who is adept. Of course, nobody can hear me say this, but
The last thing we heard was you were talking about the absence of camels.
right. Can you hear me now?
Yes, now we can hear you.
Yes.
Okay. So, just over a year ago, a very scholarly book was written by some scholars in Europe. One a paleozoologist, and one a
Mute.
You got muted again somehow.
The host muted everybody.
No, Chas v'sholom.
You're back. We can hear you again.
Okay, we're back. Okay, so this very nice book, Camels in the Biblical World, showed that Bactrian camels were domesticated many centuries before the dromedary camels that we associate with this part of the world. The Bactrian camels came from Bactria and from the deserts in Central Asia. The Bactrian camels were an integral part of the Silk Road that went from China to the Middle East. And the Bactrian camel looks very different from the dromedary. In what way is the Bactrian camel different? So it has two humps. Yes, very good. The Bactrian camel has two humps. Did you know that the Bactrian camel has two humps? Yes. So all the students here are in agreement that the Bactrian camel has two humps. And are those humps big or little? I actually had a picture of a Bactrian camel. What? Well, maybe the ones that are presently still hanging out in the Gobi Desert are taller and thinner, but the visual impact of the normal Bactrian camels that we have today, pretty much the same as they have been for 4,000 years, are the visual impact of the head and the neck is just about the same as the visual impact of each of the humps. So what we have there is a walking example of three. We have a picture. Somebody is holding up. Yes, that's okay. I have a better one where the humps look really and decked out in wool. They could go through not only desert but cold. Go for 7 days with no water. When they come to water, a 1,000-pound camel could drink 200 pounds of water in 10 minutes. They're really phenomenal. So the Gimel is the third letter. And having learned from the Dalet and from the Tes and from the Yud, that these letters are not necessarily associated in terms of their ideas, but maybe the number that's most associated with this letter is the key. So if you wanted something that would represent 3, that was a part of the everyday life in the time and place that Avraham Avinu was associated with, when he left Harran, a camel would be a good bet. Now the name Harran means 2 things at least. One is a crossroads, and the other is a caravan. Caravans with camels came down from the mountain.
What language is that?
Akkadian. In fact, those who like to check things out can go to the Chicago Assyrian Dictionary, which is available in some 20 volumes, downloadable online with every word searchable, machine searchable. A free download of the work of many scholars for many decades. And you could see not only the definition of each word, but what sources were relied upon for this definition. It's like the Oxford English Dictionary, and then some, for the ancient languages of Mesopotamia, particularly Hebrew, Assyrian, Akkadian, Eblaite, Ugaritic. What?
What was this called again?
Harran. Oh, the Chicago Assyrian Dictionary, the CAD. And for each letter, there's 1 or more big volumes. So Harran was a crossroads. Harran was a place of caravans. But the domestication of the Bactrian camel did not take place, as we understand it, 5,000 years ago. And it did not take place 3,000 years ago. It took place maybe between 4,200 and 4,500 years ago. That is in the same time frame that the head of Mazel Shor was rising with the sun in spring, the time of the equinox. So those 2 letters give us a more science-based, still conjectural time frame for the invention of the aleph base. Now, why would anybody go and invent an aleph base? Particularly this kind of aleph base, this Ktav Ivri, where the letters are pictographic, where if you see the picture, you understand the sound, and you could remember the picture from the number. You remember Tes is the 9th letter, Gimel is the 3rd letter, Dalet is the 4th letter, and we could explain all the letters with some difficulties this way, up to 10. Why would somebody invent something like this? What was the impetus? So, most people don't ask such questions. I asked that question. And I said, what was going on in Harran, in the neighborhood of Harran, that would have inspired our ancestors to invent this system? You could stay and listen, by the way. You have some young students here who might like to stay and listen, but maybe not. So what was going on in Harran? Harran was not just a backwater place. Harran, as I mentioned, is a crossroads, a major destination for caravans. If you were traveling east-west between the Mediterranean and Babylon or Nineveh or Ur, you would go on a road that went typically through Harran. And Harran was very well situated. It was at the beginning of a large rectangular valley, surrounded by mountains on 3 sides, open to the south in the direction of the Euphrates River, though the Euphrates River was still some way south of Harran. That valley at one time, at the time of Avraham Avinu, was fertile. The mountains around that valley were covered with trees. It was a really excellent place to prosper as merchants, as farmers, as shepherds. But something new happened in Harran in the lifetime before Avraham Avinu left Harran. The people who became the leaders of Harran were the priests of the moon god. Now, that might seem like a totally strange thing. Who would want to be a priest of the moon god anyway? Isn't it just a stupid racket? But those priests of the moon god in Harran remained there for more than 3,000 years. Under the Christians and under the Muslims, Harran was the capital city of the priests of the moon god. Where did these people get their strength from? So most of you have heard of Ur. Ur is mentioned in the Torah. As I said, there's a question of whether the Ur that Avraham came from was somewhere near Harran, or the great city roughly 1,000 kilometers to the southeast that is a pile of ruins today with a giant ziggurat, estimated to be 30 meters high when it was in working order. So why would Ur be the capital city of the moon god? Because those priests in Harran came initially from that city, Ur. Who would, in their right mind, become a priest of the moon god? Any guesses? Anybody who's heard this before could jump in and say something? Okay, so, what?
I don't think the moon is very visible in the sky.
Okay, so the moon is very visible, the stars are very bright, but I would hope that wherever they are, the sun is even bright. So if you want to be the priest of some kind of a astronomical phenomenon, be the priest of the sun god. What's the deal with the moon? So
did it have to do with the tide?
What?
Did it have to do with the tide?
The tides, very good. Who said that?
Me.
Me.
Yeah.
Who's me?
Zevi Khan.
Very good. Oh, wow. There he is. See, he's not in the picture, so I didn't see him. So, Zevi Khan says, did it have to do with the tides? Very good. But meanwhile, if you look at Word Today, I'm supposed to have some visuals here, but I don't have them in my book, which some of you may have. You can see pictures. On maps today, if you look at Ur is nowhere near any water. It's in the middle of a sandy desert. It's 200 kilometers from the head of the Persian Gulf. But where was it 4,500 years ago? Now, cities don't usually pick up and move. But 4,500 years ago, the city of Ur, with their great temple for the moon god, was right on the edge of the Persian Gulf. Now, as I said, the city did not move, but the Persian Gulf changed its boundaries very substantially in the past 4,500 years, and that city was on the edge of the Persian Gulf. Now, it's one thing to be on the edge of a body of water, and it's another thing to be on the edge of a body of water that has really big tides, like 1 or 2 meters up and 1 or 2 meters down. The Bay of Kuwait, which is now at the head of the Persian Gulf, has a 4-meter spread between the high and low tides. 4 meters is not a trivial amount. If you set out walking in a flat land with tides like that, and it was dry when you set out, you might be in very much difficulty in not too many hours when the tide came in. If you set out in a boat in the Persian Gulf and you didn't know what the tides were, you could be heading out to sea, and meanwhile you'll be washed 100 kilometers up the river by a tidal bore. What is a tidal bore? A tidal bore is a wave. The tide doesn't just rise gradually, it rises with a wave that's even higher than the tide itself, that rushes up the river, and in some places in the world you could actually surf a tidal bore. So the land around that ancient city of Ur, which is now a pile of ruins in the middle of the desert, was very flat, marshy land. It was critical for the life of those people to understand the tides. And what did they discover, as Rabbi Trank said? The tides are connected to the moon. The most influential heavenly body when it comes to the tides is the moon. The sun is also important. So these people in Ur, these were the Sumerians. These people became experts on the movements of the moon and the sun. And they saw there were other heavenly bodies moving also. The planets that we mentioned at the beginning, because this is Hanukkah, we mentioned the planets, the moon, the sun, and the fixed stars. They became experts in astronomy. They became experts in mathematics. And then they got a little lost. They became experts in astrology. They began to attribute everything to the position of the stars. The position of the stars, for example, when a person is born. And since they were very good at predicting the positions of the planets and the stars and things like that, it was very impressive. They may have actually believed this themselves. So, some 100 years or so, or 200 years or so, before the time of Avraham Avinu, that great temple, I shouldn't say great, that temple, very big temple, in Ur, on the edge of the Persian Gulf, was attacked. The walls of the city were attacked. The moon god priests had to move. And the moon god priests moved to a city that was an outpost of Ur. Where was that city? What was the name of that city? That city was Harran. Very good, people paying attention. So those people who were great astronomers, great mathematicians, who knew more about astronomy and mathematics than almost anybody in their day, they set up shop in Harran. And that might have been why Avraham Avinu had to leave. That might have been why Avraham Avinu was persecuted. And that might have been why the school of Ivri, the school of the students of Shlemeh and Ivri, made a special effort to resist them. So, to resist the priests of the moon god. So how could they resist them? They had to make sure that our traditions of the way the world works were conveyed to everyone in our community, to the adults and to the children. In those days, almost very few people could read and write. There were scholars, expert scribes who could write in cuneiform, where there were hundreds of different characters, a different character for every syllable. It took a long time to learn to write this, and a very long time to read it. So the people who were the students of Ivri in Harran, in the shadow of the moon god priests, had to come up with a method of communication that everyone could learn quickly. They didn't have schools for people to sit in for several years to learn. They were shepherds. They traveled up and down the mountains. So they got together and they invented Ktav Ivri. What is the advantage of Ktav Ivri compared with any alphabet that we have today? Ktav Ivri is so beautifully made that a person could learn it while walking. If you know the number of the letter, you could tie it with the idea of the letter. If you know the letters before or after a letter that you forgot, as we could learn by the letters after the 10th letter, you could learn by the neighbors of the letter. So the combination of the position of the letter in the 22 letters of the alphabet, of the aleph base, and their relation to either the number for the first 10 or their neighbors, and the shapes of the letters, which were pictographic. All of those things provided very strong didactic, mnemonic methods for a person to learn the aleph base quickly. Now today, if you wanted to learn the ABCs, I think if I ask the students sitting here, everyone will be embarrassed to even think that anybody could ask them whether they know the ABCs. Do you know the ABCs? Okay. Did you ever notice, any of you here, any of the letters of the English or Latin alphabet, which is now the Pinyin alphabet also? Pinyin is the letters that the Latin or English letters that they use in China to teach the Chinese children to read Chinese. So did you notice any of the letters in the English, Latin, Pinyin alphabet that resemble Ktav Ivri letters? Anybody? A, yes. The capital A looks like the Ktav Ivri aleph. I, right. So the capital I looks like that sarcophagus I look, not our balance scale look. but it clearly came from the Phoenician version of Ktav Ivri. Think of KLMN. KLMN is in the same order as Ktav Ivri, and if you look at the letters, you'll see that they're almost the same shapes. Those of you who study science or mathematics know a little Greek. Actually, if you come from Greece, you probably know a lot of Greek. So what are the first four letters of the Greek alphabet? Alpha, beta, gamma, delta. Alpha, beta, gamma, delta. So that follows pretty much exactly Aleph, Beis, Gimel, Dalet. And what does the delta look like? What does the delta look like in Greek? It looks like the triangle in Ktav Ivri. Just exactly the same. And the names of the letters are almost the same as they are in the Aleph base. So I'll skip some letters and I'll go to a letter that was very difficult for me. Samach. Now Samach today looks like a circle. Does anybody disagree? No. Everybody agrees? Samach looks like a circle. What did Samach look like, or what does Samach look like in Ktav Ivri? Somebody has it on their smartphone. Would you like to describe what it looks like?
Kind of like a pine tree a little bit, but I guess vertical line.
So there's a vertical line.
3 lines sectioning it to go across the vertical line.
Right.
The bottom one's the longest, the middle one's the shortest, and the top one's in the middle.
And does the vertical line extend above the? Okay. So that's the Phoenician version. However, another student uses his fingers to show that it's a vertical line with 3 horizontal lines crossing it, only in the upper half, or the upper part of the vertical line. And the lower part of the vertical line has nothing crossing it. And there's nothing extending above the top horizontal line. So this letter got me very confused because I first looked at the one that we first heard about, where you have a vertical line and 3 lines crossing it with a part sticking up above and a part sticking down below. What is that? So I tried to combine this circle and this strange shape, and I said maybe you put them together and you have a walled trellised vineyard. Well, that's almost certainly wrong. And then I thought, well, it comes after Nun. Nun means fish. So maybe it's some kind of a trap for catching fish. And I contacted a scientist who was a specialist in the fish and the history of fish in Mesopotamian rivers to see whether there was a history of using traps for fish. And though there might have been such a history, the Samach is not a picture of a trap for fish. When you see it the way it was described in the second case, as a vertical line with 3 lines crossing it at the top and the lower part unobstructed and nothing extending above, what you see is a picture of any guesses? Tree. You see a picture of a tree. It is a picture of a tree. It is not only a picture of a tree, but the most likely tree that it's a picture of is a cedar of Lebanon type of tree, where the branches extend horizontally. Wow, it's a tree. So, I don't know where we're holding as far as time is concerned. Where are we holding?
227.
What?
227.
10:27. So, that great Chicago Assyrian dictionary, I used it to see whether there's a word for a word that looks like samach, that means tree. And there is. So there are many names for many different kinds of trees, but one of the trees that's found in the Chicago Assyrian Dictionary is samach. Now I could go on and explain, or try to explain, the rest of the letters. And for some of them I have pretty good ideas. And some of them, the ideas are not as good. The ones that I didn't mention, for example, are not as good as those that I did mention. But the idea of these stories explaining the background of the letters is not that they are necessarily and exactly the best description, but they are part of a didactic mnemonic device so that children and adults could learn this very quickly and absorb the Torah, which at that time presumably consisted of the first 2 chapters of Genesis, and use that knowledge to resist the priests of the moon god. So in our day, there are still people who believe in astrology. And there are even astrologers who still believe in astrology, which by itself is challenging. But we don't have to assume that these priests of the moon god understood that they were just peddling a lot of nonsense. Because we have an example of something where well-intentioned people for more than 2,000 years were promoting something that was really bad. This is the medical profession following the teachings of Galen. And before Galen, Hippocrates. So the standard treatment for pneumonia, according to Galen, and apparently according to Hippocrates, was, does anybody know? Bloodletting. How much bloodletting? Was bleed them till they faint. Bleed them till they faint was the standard treatment for those who followed Galen and Hippocrates for more than 2,000 years. And what was the result of this bleed them till they faint treatment for people suffering from pneumonia? These were not priests peddling some nonsense to poor ignorant people. These were doctors attempting to treat their patients. These doctors attempting to treat their patients killed millions of their patients with this idiotic treatment. In China, they did not use bleed them till they faint for the treatment of pneumonia. Apparently in China, some thousands of years ago, somebody did a test of the bleed them till they faint method and the acupuncture method. And what did they find? Acupuncture cures more people than bleed them till they faint. So the people in China, according to this understanding, dropped the bleed them till they faint idea and took up acupuncture. Now, what is the effect of acupuncture? I don't really know. But if the effect of acupuncture was 0, that it didn't make people better or worse, it was a lot better than bleed them till they faint. And if you think this is something from ancient history, a major scientific study was done of bloodletting for pneumonia. It was done now about 170 years ago in Vienna, not a backwater place. It was done by Joseph Dietl. And why did he do this? This is very important because we say, Ezehu Chacham. Ezehu Chacham, made me call Adam, who learns from everybody. So a new hospital was set up in Vienna, the homeopathic hospital of Vienna. And the doctors would look in on each other to see how they were doing. The people who were doing the regular treatments from Galen looked in on the homeopathic hospital, and the homeopathic people looked in on the people who were using the Galenic treatments or similar things. And Dr. Dietl noticed that in the homeopathic hospital, the death rate was 5 to 7%. And in the regular hospital, it was 20%. So they weren't curing 80% of the people. It occurred to Joseph Dietl that they were killing more than 10% of the people. So he did a first-class scientific experiment with more than 300 patients, dividing them randomly into the 2 treatments. But he couldn't tell the sick patients that we're giving you nothing. So he said to them, we're giving you hay tea, tea made from hay, a new treatment for pneumonia. And he found that those who received the standard treatment died at a rate of 20%. And those who received the hay tea, that is no treatment, died at a rate of about 7.4%. And he published a study, and it went out across the world. But even the best of the doctors, that's an expression some people know who've studied Kedushin, the best of the doctors go to Gehenna. That's what it says. Yehud ben Eli, in the name of Abu Guria, says the best of the doctors go to Gehenna, and the most kosher of butchers is Parnas Hamah. So this study was done 170 years ago, and it took more than 60 years to clear the decks of that nonsense. So it may be that these moon god priests really thought that they were onto something in understanding that astrology was the real thing, and they pushed it successfully for more than 3,000 years until the Mongols came and destroyed the city and sent the people into slavery. So if anybody, so I'll finish at that point. If anybody wants the book, you could get it directly from me. That way you'll get the best version, and you can actually contact me and tell me what you think, both of my talk and of the book. My email address is avshadler, strudel or @ yahoo.com. And if you don't want to contact me directly, you could find one of my books in the National Library. If you go to the website of the National Library of Israel and search under the word myopia, which is my 7th book, and then sort by the most recent, you'll find my book. And on myopia, why some yeshiva students don't need glasses. A study that could have been done 20 years ago. A study that found very important things. Get rid of it if they have it. If they're an 8-year-old and they have one or two diopters myopia, by the time they're 13, it's very likely they could get rid of it. So you can find that book. You can look in the bibliography. You could see early versions of the book, and you could contact me directly and tell me what you think, not only of my 7th book, but of this book, my 8th book, coincident with Hanukkah, and in the merit of our growing in Torah and mitzvahs and being able to ask and sometimes even answer good questions. We should grow in all good things and see the coming of Mashiach Tzidkeinu Meir Remain Amen. If anybody has any questions, I'm still sitting here. I don't see anybody running to attack me. And I even have a glass of water. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, she'akol yeh b'varo.
Can you talk about the question about the order of the letters, ayin and pei and ayin?
All right, so there are some small discrepancies in the order of the letters. I haven't analyzed that, but if you wanted to understand what made more sense, pei ayin or ayin pei, ayin is both a well or a mayan, and it's an eye. Pei is a mouth, so these two things go together. And ayin pei sadi. So what's sadi? Sadi appears to be a fishing rod and line about to be cast into the water. Now, this is a didactic mnemonic device. How would parents or teachers of Ktav Ivri remind the students of the order of the letters? So if nun is a fish, and it's pretty sure that nun is a fish with its mouth pointing upward as it would be seen if it were caught by, wow, I see somebody that's familiar here. Wow, all the way from California.
I'm Jakob.
Yes, there are some people from California watching this lecture. So one of them I know is a teacher.
I'm from California.
Yes. Okay. So one of my students here, who was actually my teacher from the time I was very little, knows about didactic mnemonic devices. Wow, the third person. The third person. Shalom Aleichem. Chanukah Sameach. Chanukah. All the way from California. So a didactic mnemonic device is not the way scientists usually put things. The scientists, remember, said the side, what I see looks like a cow, and the side that I see is brown. So if you were setting up a system of letters and you wanted people to learn quickly, you'd have to include some kind of relevant didactic mnemonic devices. So the fish sees the bait. That's the eye, the ayin. And it grabs the hook with what part of its body? With its mouth. So there you have nun, so it's Nun Samach Ayin Pei. So the Samach is a tree standing by the water. Not only does it stand by the water, but if you see trees in the distance, it will tell you that you have some kind of an oasis or something like that. So a tree could tell you this is an oasis and not a mirage. And then you have Samach Ayin Pei. Yes?
Could be related. Same area that the fish is in the book.
Yes.
Same area not pronounced another
Yes. Yes, it could be. There are several things in my book about the origin of the names of the letters. And Nun, though, is a very old word, possibly from Sumerian. The Sumerians had something on the order of 50 different names for fish. In the
Aramaic
Bible,
also.
many, right. Nun is an Aramaic word. At least today, not too many people speaking Sumerian today except scholars. But I think that the ayin, Samach Ayin Pei, is maybe a remez to seeing the bait, catching the bait on the hook with the mouth, and then the person is pulling it in. What could happen if a person, God forbid, ate his fish too fast or her fish too fast? Well, you could, God forbid, choke on the bones. So what is the next letter after? This is where things get a little weak, just in case you want to slug it up or you want to show a better way. It's very welcome. What's the next letter? Kuf. Q-R-S-T. You wonder where Q came from. Q came from Kuf. So Kuf sounds like cough. And if a person, God forbid, and what does it look like? It looks like a circle with a line going through it and extending below it. It looks like the head and neck. So it seems to be pointing to the place where you make the kuf sound, and it also is pointing to a place where a person could conceivably get a bone stuck in their throat. So this might be a possible didactic mnemonic technique for learning these letters. And again, anyone who wants to come up with a better one, you're welcome to do so. Any more questions?
Yeah, you said that the Shlemeh Ivri came up with this writing system for it to be easy to learn. But
yes.
The language of Hebrew, was it around, or did they develop this as a language for whatever language that they spoke over there?
Well, it appears from the letters themselves that much of what we understand to be Hebrew was already around, because they limited the number of letters to 22. And several of the letters have two sounds associated with them, which a native speaker of the language would be able to understand when you used one sound and when you used another sound. Also, half of the 22 letters are single letter affixes. The letter means something by itself. So it seems that those sounds meaning something by itself existed before the aleph base was created. And in addition, there was a syllabic system of writing, not only the cuneiform system, but probably something for writing on wax boards or something like that. And the writing of Hebrew and the associated languages was already in place before the invention of Ktav Ivri. Ktav Ivri, I'm estimating, was invented around 4,000 years ago, but there was writing using syllabic systems in cuneiform and hieroglyphics in Egypt, which is a different language, more than 1,000 years before that. So there might have been some adjustments in the language that coincided with the time of the invention of the aleph base, but the language, to a great extent, existed before this. And we do, of course, have words in the Torah from before Avraham Avinu, and we even have the idea of Adam Rishon writing a book. This is the book of the generations of Adam. But it's a very good question, and a related question is, who, if anyone, helped to structure Hebrew the way it is? Because it has a very, very distinctive structure, and that by itself is another question which I haven't answered yet. Any more questions?
What were the Ten Commandments written in? And when was the
What?
current? What letters were used on the Ten Commandments? And
So that's a very good
when
question.
was the current Hebrew letter system invented?
So So there's a difference of opinion among our sages of the Talmud. Rabbi Yossi ben Holafta understood, as he explains in the section of the Talmud Megillah in the Yerushalmi version, he understands that everything was in Ktav Ivri up until the time of Ezra. And Eliezer ben Yaakov in Zvachim, Samach Beis Amid Aleph, just above the white lines, says that 3 prophets came at the time of Ezra. One said where the altar was. One said that you could offer sacrifices on the altar without the temple. And the third said that you could write the Torah in Ktav Ivri, in Ktav Ashuris, that is the Aleph base similar to what we have today. So the understanding is that both Yossi ben Halafta and Eliezer ben Yaakov saw Ktav Ivri as the original language of the Ten Commandments and from before that. But Elazar Modai, who was also a Tana, but he's not quoted frequently on legal issues, halachic issues, he says everything was in Ktav Ashuris, including the Ten Commandments. Any more questions?
Can you give us a brief outline about what happened to the Ivri script afterwards? Like it was adopted by the Phoenicians, then the Greeks, and then it was sort of,
right.
brought into Romans, and then it's sort of the precursor to our alphabet. Like how did that work exactly?
Right. So the Phoenician language is very close to the to Hebrew, and the Phoenicians used a convenient writing system that where a person could write. This is a very important issue that I didn't get to. That scientist and his brown cow question. If Ktav Ivri was invented, as I say, roughly 4,000 years ago, and the first evidence that we have in terms of physical, tangible things of the layout of the Aleph base and pretty much the order that we have now came roughly 600 years after that. What about that 600-year gap? How can we possibly explain that such a wonderful thing was invented 600 years before we find any evidence of it, other than in the Torah or my type of analysis? We have something that happened more recently, something that happened about 570 years ago or so, where the king of Korea invented a new alphabet. With the assistance of some of his sages, he invented a new alphabet so that the people of Korea could read the Confucian classics and other things that the king believed were important without first learning Chinese. Chinese is a very wonderful writing system, but in order to learn to read it, you have to spend a tremendous amount of time. And most hardworking farmers and their families didn't have the time to learn Chinese. So the result was most of the people in Korea were illiterate. And to create a high level of literacy in his country, King Sejong the Great invented a new alphabet, which is today used by 80 million people. But even though it was the king himself who promoted this, there's nothing in stone or clay with even one letter of this Korean alphabet, Hangul, for 90 years. Even the tombs of the kings have nothing in this new alphabet. And the first thing that we have written in stone is an insult, literally an insult to anyone who could read it. Part of the stone, the stone was used as a grave marker. Part of it is written in Chinese, and part of it is written in this new alphabet. And what does it say in the new alphabet? It says, "Don't touch this stone." So it was, the writing system was associated with ignorant people, and the intelligent, thoughtful people knew Chinese. It was the Christian promoters of Christianity, the missionaries in Korea, who promoted the new writing system. And it was missionaries, whether Jewish missionaries or Christian missionaries or Muslim missionaries, who promoted various versions of this writing system very effectively across the world. The Phoenicians also promoted it. They did business across the Mediterranean and even went beyond the Straits of Gibraltar.
You're muted again.
You're muted.
Everybody get him.
Oh. There you go. Hello? So, the world owes a debt to the Phoenicians and to the Greeks. They picked up this idea and they spread it wherever they went. Other people also picked up the idea and spread it wherever they went. As a result, the Greeks developed their alphabet. And we should also mention, before the Greeks and before the Phoenicians, there were the people of Ugarit. For a very long time, the Egyptologists were saying, well, there's no evidence. And then a whole city was dug up in the coastal area of northern Syria, Ugarit. And they found literally on the order of 2,000 cuneiform tablets in cuneiform alphabets in the same order, pretty much the same order as the alphabets that we have today. And that's because apparently the political leaders of Ugarit pushed this new writing system. But it's clear to the scholars that the first alphabets did not originate in Ugarit. There's no development of the alphabets in Ugarit. It just started and went on for maybe 60 years or so, and then the city was burned. And thanks to it being burned, a lot of the clay tablets were baked very well and have survived as a result for 32 or 3,300 years. Any other questions?
A lot of what you're saying, like let's say for example, the way you understood the letter Tes, draws on the numeric value of the letter in the order of the alphabet as we have it.
That's right, the first 10 letters.
So, like, what we colloquially call gematria. What's the earliest evidence we have that people were using gematria as a paradigm for understanding letters? And like, how do we know that people related to Tes as related to the number 9?
Well, the idea that Tes is related to the number 9 comes from what Tes represents. Tes represents a ball of wool yarn, or some kind of yarn, and women make yarn, they spin yarn. It doesn't have anything to do with gematria. And we could see in the Torah itself that I believe in every place where a number is mentioned, the number is spelled out, and it's not given as single letters. You may know particular places where this is not true.
Exactly, it's spelled out in words. It's not. That's
right. It's spelled out in words. So there are a lot of things that we have these days that were not around in the time of Yossi ben Halafta, but many people think that they were around. And one of them is the understanding of the shape of the Zohar, of the Zion in the Zohar. So maybe I shouldn't discuss the Zohar because it's a controversial issue, but anyone who wants to can look at the description of the Aleph Beis in the first chapter of the Zohar. They could look at what is said about the Zion in the first chapter of the Zohar that deals with the Aleph Beis, and they could compare it with that very distinctive, long, low, whatever it is look that I said was a balance scale. They could do that, and they could understand from that if Yossi ben Halafta and Eliezer ben Yaakov said what they said, and none of their colleagues, like Shimon Bar Yochai or Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Meir, said otherwise, and the only one in that particular group who was a contemporary who says anything is Elazar Modai. So usually you would go with the majority of the Tanaim, and you could see also what the physical reality is, and you could take it from there. But I'm not an expert on the Zohar, and I'm not an expert on gematria, and a person should talk as much as possible about what they know and not about what they don't know.
There is a whole story why the Latin alphabet is A, B, C, as opposed to Aleph, Bet, Gimel. And why the Zayin in the Latin alphabet has been sent to the end of the alphabet, whereas it is at the 7th position. It's a whole story. It's the whole story which goes back to the Romans. The Romans didn't write.
So, as I said, this alphabet, the Aleph base, was invented for people who spoke Hebrew, or something close to Hebrew. And in Hebrew, you could understand the vowels, for the most part, from the consonants and from the context. But in Greek, you can't understand the vowels from the consonants and from the context. And so the Greeks and the Romans and others who picked up this general idea had to add additional letters. So they added additional letters wherever they saw fit. And as a result, the Greeks kept the names of the letters, so the names didn't mean anything to the Greeks. The only alphabet where the name fit the picture and the sound and the order is Ktav Ivri. Even Ktav Ashuris, the Aleph base that we have today, it's a straight memory task to learn the letters. Whereas Ktav Ivri is, as I said, a really beautiful, ingenious invention that was designed so that ordinary people, adults and children, could learn it even while walking. As far as reading it, they could learn it while walking, and as far as writing it, they could learn it very quickly as well. They did not write on clay. They did not carve in stone. We have a 250-word description of how Avraham bought the Me'aras HaMachpelah, the burial place for Sarah. 250 words is not a mention of a single written thing. The agreement was made before the community. Nothing was in writing. The money was exchanged. The agreement was made. When Joshua wrote the whole law, he wrote it on plaster on rocks, not carved into the rocks themselves. The carving into rocks is very expensive. Now, I didn't mention the wonderful finds in the Sinai Desert. More than 100 years ago, there were some kind of writing, it's called Proto-Sinaitic, found in the Sinai Desert. And they have, among other things, a letter that some people say is the predecessor or the precursor of the letter Hey. And that letter looks like a person in exaltation. If you look at the letter Hey in Ktav Ivri, you'll see that it has absolutely nothing to do with a person in exaltation. And the people who wrote those inscriptions in the Sinai Desert and other places in Egypt were people who were carrying, they were miners. There were people who were carrying metal tools that could carve in stone. It's the kind of scratchiti or graffiti that you see in the Sinai Desert. I'm sorry if I belittle these finds, and Professor Goldwasser might come after me, but I think that those signs that might be struggles of some people to express themselves, but they are relatively distant from Ktav Ivri. Though at the same time, I should be clear that there is a symbol, the samach, that I had so much difficulty with, that appears to have been used in the hieroglyphics in Egypt to mean a tree dating from before 4,000 years ago. So Egypt is an important place, and as I said before, the inventors of the Aleph base could have learned from Egypt and from whatever there was to learn.
Just to address Mr. Garson's point, I listened to a series of fascinating episodes on the History of English podcast, and they have some episodes about connecting how the English alphabet goes back to what he calls the Phoenician alphabet, but it's more or less the same thing as Ivri. And he talked about the letter C. He has a whole discussion over there about why the
exactly.
The Romans decided to change the gimel into a C.
Exactly. And this is why the J is like the C. And they didn't
I,
like the
I and J are newer letters. I and J used to be one letter, and then
no, I'm talking about the G. The G and the C. G and C are almost the same, and they didn't like the Z, the Zayin, so they pushed it back to the end of the alphabet. This is where the alphabet, where the Z.
Each community adapted the general idea to fit its own language. So the Greeks had to add some vowels, and the Romans adjusted it however they wanted. And then there's also changes in the sounds of the letters themselves. whether it was Caius or Gaius is a question that people ask. So that C may have at one time been a G sound. And in Cyrillic, additional letters were added. Actually, Cyrillic added a letter that looks like a shin to the Latin repertoire. And they also added a letter that looks like a tzadi to the Latin and Greek repertoire. So wherever this system went, it helped to promote literacy. And that comes to a point that I didn't raise, and that is, this is perhaps the first invention of a censorship-resistant information technology. And in this case, the sages of that time wanted to resist the monopolization of information and ideas by the moon god priests, and they invented this so that every adult and child would have literally on their person, in their pocket, writings that supported the ideas of God in the world, of kindness and things like that, and went against the ideas of these moon god priests. Any more questions?
All right,
Looks like
that's a wrap. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you all very much, and you should have a Hanukkah Sameach.
Thank you very much.
And,
Shalom, shalom.
definitely enjoyed the presentation.
Wow. Hanukkah Sameach. Hanukkah Sameach. Wow.
Bye.